Hello and welcome back. In the previous exercise, what we looked at was a file-to-file scenario where a file was picked up by a sender file adapter. There was a mapping that got executed and a file was posted into the receiver file adapter. Now what we would do in this session is look at, like mentioned in the previous session as well, we will look at how to monitor these interface, see what happens in the runtime. We will also induce an error into our scenario. We will make certain changes such that our scenario fails, and then we will also look at how do we monitor for errors. What are the various monitoring options you have, what are the various transactions you use for monitoring, and so on. But just before we do that, what I would want to do is walk you through a couple of slides where I would want to walk you through the various functionalities that PI provides in terms of monitoring, in terms of what are the various transactions you will access, and so on. Okay, so with that, let me just go into full screen mode. Yeah, so the first thing that we will look at is what are the pipeline steps of PI. So if you remember the file-to-file scenario, in the integration directory, the objects that we created was a sender agreement, a receiver determination, an interface determination, and a receiver agreement, right? Those were your configuration objects that we built, and that was used to bind all of the enterprise service repository objects that you built together. So what do we mean by pipeline steps? Pipeline steps is the execution of your design time and configuration time through a defined set of steps in PI. So basically this is the runtime step that gets executed for any interface in PI. So what are these runtime steps? So what are these pipeline steps that we are looking at? Right? So what happens is the first thing that will come up is your sender file adapter. Let's take the file-to-file scenario, right? The sender file adapter is used to pick up the file. So this is the sender file adapter picking up an XML message. So once the XML message is picked up by the sender file adapter, the list of steps that you see here is what we call as a pipeline step, and every message in PI will go through these pipeline steps. Okay. So the file adapter picks up the file and then passes on to the next pipeline step, that is the receiver identification step. The receiver identification step, as the name implies, is to identify who's the recipient of this message. So how is this information derived from? Using the receiver determination object. So the receiver determination object will help identify who the receiver is, and in the pipeline execution, this step is called the receiver identification. Now for each receiver that has been identified, what would happen is the interface determination step would get executed. If you remember, we created an object called interface determination. Now that object is going to get executed in the runtime, and now what can happen is you can have a message split that can happen if your message has multiple inbound interfaces, or if the same message is to be passed to multiple mappings, then there can be something that's called as a message split that can happen. This is not a mandatory step. So depending upon your interface determination configuration, if there's a message split required, the message split will occur. But if there's no message split required, from the interface determination you will directly go into the mapping execution, where your actual mapping is going to get executed. And what is the mapping? A mapping is where the source format is translated into the target format, right? So the mapping gets executed in the runtime, and till now the target message has been formed, and now that the target message has been formed, the message now needs to be sent to the receiver system, right? So for that, the pipeline step that gets executed is called a technical routing step. Now in the technical routing step, what you need to be aware of is the message will identify what is the corresponding channel that needs to be called. So in our file-to-file scenario, in the technical routing step, the message will identify, hey, I need to hand over this message to this particular receiver channel, right? And how does it do that? It uses the receiver agreement object. So with the receiver agreement object, the technical routing step identifies what is the recipient channel, and then the last step that is going to get executed is the call adapter step. And the call adapter step is used to take the message and pass it to the actual adapter, in this case the file adapter, that is now going to deliver the file to the target system. So in summary, all the configuration objects that we built, the receiver determination, the interface determination, the receiver agreement, all of these get executed in the runtime through multiple pipeline steps, and these and the pipeline steps are nothing but the runtime step of PI. Okay, so with that, before we go into the monitoring one, this is how our runtime workbench or our monitoring time looks like. So if we look at previously we had one box that told runtime workbench. Now what we are looking at is a runtime workbench that contains multiple internal components, right? We will look at each of these components. The first component that we would like to highlight is what we call as a message alerting. Now what is message alerting is, what if there is a failure in PI, right? The failure could be a mapping failure, the failure could be a connectivity failure, the failure could be one of the components of PI not working the way you would like it to work. So what if there is a failure in your integration layer? So the message alerting is an inbuilt functionality of PI where any error, be it a message failure, be it a component failure, any error in PI can trigger an alert. This could be an email, that could be a fax, this could be an SMS, but the idea being that there is an inbuilt feature provided. Obviously there needs to be some configuration that is required, but having said that, it's minimal configuration. But there is a concept of message alerting where automated alerts can be triggered to a recipient every time there is a failure in PI, and all these components that we're looking at form a part of the PI monitoring or the PI runtime workbench. The runtime workbench and PI monitoring are used interchangeably, and the reason behind that being the runtime workbench, the PI monitoring in previous versions of PI used to happen via the runtime workbench, whereas in the current versions of PI it happens via PI monitoring. Okay, so message alerting enables you to trigger automated alerts to a recipient if there is in the event of a failure, and you can define conditions for the failure, you can define how many alerts are to be triggered, and so on. You can define priorities, you can define escalation paths. A lot of cool stuff can be done in the message alerting functionality. The next thing that I would like to define is what is central monitoring. The central monitoring is nothing but the monitoring that enable in PI. The monitoring is called central monitoring or PI monitoring. The central monitoring has multiple options in it. You have component monitoring, you have message monitoring, you have end-to-end monitoring, you have performance monitoring, and you have cache monitoring. And finally, integration process monitoring, and this is applicable only for a dual stack server. Do not worry, I'm going to be going into each of them individually. So let's look at the first monitoring, right? Component monitoring. Component monitoring is any, if you remember, you have multiple components of PI. You have your enterprise service repository, you have your integration directory, you have your system landscape directory, you have your integration server, which contains of your integration engine, your business process engine, and your adapter engine. If you remember, we looked at the various components of PI in the first session of this course. So how do you make sure if all of these components are healthy, all of these components are working as we required? That happens via component monitoring. We will be looking at the demo of this, do not worry about it. Okay, but at a very high level, the component monitoring enables you to connect and see if all the components of your PI server are working the way we would like to do that. So now let's connect to the system and look at the component monitoring. Okay, sorry. And now I'm going to go. The good news is previously we were using a PI 7.31 server. Now we are using a PI 7.4 server. So everything remains the same, nothing has changed. This is just an FYI that the server we were using has changed, but all the objects and everything that we built in the previous exercise is available here. Okay, so now I've logged on to my PI server, and now that I've logged on to my PI server, how do I connect to my PI homepage? I go to the transaction sxmb underscore ifr. So I launch my transaction, and these are the components of PI. We've already looked at enterprise service repository, we've looked at integration directory, and we've done work on the system landscape directory. Out here, do you see this section called configuration and monitoring? And then you have something called configuration and monitoring home. This is exactly what we're going to be looking at. SAP NetWeaver Administrator is for your system administrators to do advanced configurations. We will not be looking at this, but we will be looking at from a monitoring standpoint, how do we monitor? So go ahead, click on this link. And now that I've clicked on this link, In your case, it might ask you for your username password. If it asks for your username password, just go ahead and provide your username and the password. Okay, now this is our monitoring home. Now, do you see something called component monitor here? You see, this is a monitoring home. You have multiple subsections here, but you have something called common and you have something called component monitor. So let's go ahead, repeat. How did I come to this page? I clicked on configuration and monitoring home from my PI homepage. Make sure you're in the monitoring tab, and in the monitoring tab, you're in the common tab, and now click on component monitor. Okay, so let PI connect and do its work. While it's doing that, so remember the component monitor enables you to monitor the status of the various components in your PI server. This is going to take some time to load, so we'll just wait for it to come up. Excellent. So our component monitoring has loaded. Basically, the component monitoring is still a part of the runtime workbench. So you'll get a new screen, something like this. In some other releases of PI, the screen can be a little different, but the concepts remain the same. So you click on component monitoring. Once you click on component monitoring, you will see all your components here. You have integration engine, business process engine, mapping runtime, and the adapter engine. And out here, clicking on each of these components, you can see, hey, what is the health of your integration engine. So in this case, if you see, there are certain objects that are in red, and that is because certain background jobs have not been scheduled in this server. But you will also see there's a self test that the component monitor executes to make sure all the components are working fine. This is the integration engine, and then this is the business process engine. Everything here is in green. Excellent. You can see all the various component tests that have happened. Then you have the mapping runtime execution, where it tries to make sure that the mapping runtime is okay. And then if I click on adapter engines, I can see, hey, is there an issue with the adapter engine? Then if you see here, there's a red button, our communication channels with errors. Let's click on details out here. There are 51 communication channels that have error, which means there is something wrong in the server where 51 channels have some errors that are in the server. We will look at each of these individually. How do you do communication channel monitoring? How do you do advanced adapter engine monitoring? So if I click here, there are certain other errors that come up. But the idea of component monitoring being that you can do a high level monitoring of your system and make sure everything is working fine, right? There are multiple other buttons out here where you can repeat your ping, you can repeat self-test if you want. You can click on the engine status and get an idea of whether the engine is up and running, the various components of your engine is up and running, how many threads are available for each system, is there a backlog of messages, and so on. Okay, if there are database logs that have happened, these are all extremely advanced concepts, but suffice to say that in the component monitoring you have multiple other options that enables you to look at the overall health of your landscape and understand what's going on within your landscape. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Okay, so the first thing that we looked at was the component monitoring. What is message monitoring? Message monitoring is nothing but your ability to monitor your messages in the runtime in your PI, right? So in the case of the file to PI to file, let's go ahead and execute that scenario one more time. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let's execute our file PI file scenario and then understand how message monitoring works, right? Okay, so I've gone here, I'm going to CG3Z. What is the transaction CG3Z used for? The CG3Z transaction is used to upload my file from my file system to my AL11 application folder. So I've just gotten all my paths available stored here, so it makes my life easy. So I'm just copying this over here. Oops, sorry. And then I'm copying this here, right? Okay, so what am I telling? Sorry, I've done a mistake here. Oops. This is the source. Oops, my bad. I'm gonna copy it just from my notepad and I'll go back here. So copy this file from my front end, my file to file to the particular directory where I have a training directory, and within which I'm going to copy it to the file to file XML directory. Okay, so let's go ahead and upload it. My file has been successfully uploaded, right? So now I'm going to /n AL11 and see what happens to my file. Let me go up one folder. Sorry, I have to now go to my PI server, and I'm going to AL11, and out here I will now go here, my training folder, and my file is gone. And if I double click here, if you see on the 16th of August, that's when this recording has happened. Just now there's this file that has been created as the output. So the file was picked up and the file was processed. How do I monitor this message, right? So let's go ahead. Go to this transaction called SXMB_MONI. I repeat it. Let me do one thing. I'll do a /n. Okay. The transaction that you need to remember, and this is an extremely important transaction, it's SXMB_MONI, and this is used for monitoring of your message. So I've entered the transaction. Once you go to SXMB_MONI, this is the transaction, SXMB_MONI. What you would need to do is double click on monitor for processed XML messages. Double click on monitor for processed XML messages. Out here, your PI server will then present to you a view where you can provide multiple details. For now, let's just go ahead and execute, right? And now once I've given execute, I can see one message found. And what is this message? It tells me that the start time of this message was 7:42. End time was again 7:42. The sender component is BS file system 00. The receiver sender interface is SIOA source. The receiver is BC file system 00. So this is our message that got executed. Do you see that? And what is this? It's a checkered flag that says process successfully. So the message got processed successfully, right? So now what I would suggest is click anywhere on this line and double click. Repeat. Click anywhere on this line or select this entire line and then double click. And once you double click, you will get additional logs of the message. Now what do you see here? You see on the left hand side, you see multiple steps. You had inbound message, you had XML validation, and then you have receiver identification, interface determination, request message mapping, technical routing, call adapter. Do you remember this? These were the pipeline steps that we had discussed. There are certain additional steps that have also gotten executed, but at a very high level, what you see is the various pipeline steps that got executed by PI, right? So let's go to the first pipeline step. This is the inbound message that came into PI, right? So now go to inbound message, payloads, and then go to the main document and double click it. Did you see this? Okay, let me do it one more time. Go to inbound message, go to payloads, and go to your main document, and out here you will see the input message come in. Do you see the input message? John Doe and so on, Jane Doe and so on. Now what happened in PI, right? The receiver got identified, the mapping got executed, and after the mapping, what is the payload? Is the payload going to be the same after the mapping? The answer is no, the payload is going to change, right? So let's again go to technical routing. What is the step after request message mapping? In the request message mapping, your mapping has executed. So after the request message mapping, go to the step technical routing and double click, go to technical routing payloads and double click the message and you see the output of PI. The idea is that within SXMB MONI, you can see both the input message and the output message. And you can see whether the message was successful, was there a failure. In this case, everything is successful, right? Let's do this one more time, because this is extremely important. I'm going to go /n, and I'm going to go launch the transaction SXMB_MONI. SXMB_MONI. I double click it. Now I go to monitoring and monitor for processed XML messages. Monitor for processed XML messages. I get to the screen. If you want, you can change the timestamp. For now, we will leave the timestamp as is and execute. And you see one line that is showing the status of your message, right? And then you can double click anywhere on your message. And when you double click, you see the detailed log of your message. If I want to see the inbound message or the input message, I will go to inbound message, payloads, and main document. What you would also need to do is you can right click and say display, whether you want the content to be displayed in window 1 or whether you want the content to be displayed in window 2. So I'm right clicking and saying display content in window 1. And you see this is the window 1 and the content is displayed here. So this was my input message. Now if I want to see my output message, I will go to technical routing, payloads, go to main documents, and now I'm going to say right click and say display content in window 2. The idea was you can do a comparison. You have two panes. So here you go. The first pane has your first input message and the second pane has your output message, basically the output of your mapping. So this is probably the most important transaction that you will be using for monitoring. There are multiple other information here. Your SOAP header contains the performance information, contains your main header will contain, okay, let's double click this. Okay, sorry. And here you see now what's happened, who's the sender of your interface, who's the sender of your interface, who is the, what is the namespace and what is the sender interface name, right? So at this point, the receiver identification step has not gotten executed. So you have only this information. Who's the sender of this interface? So now let's go into receiver identification and again main and see what's happened now. Now you have two sections, SAP sender and SAP receiver. So the sender of my message is BS file system 00 SIOA SRC. Now what PI has done is my receiver determination has executed and it has identified who's the receiver of my message. The receiver is BC file system 00 and the corresponding, the interface is still showing SIOA SRC. The reason, it has just identified the receiver, it has still not identified who's the inbound receiver interface. So now I'm going to the interface determination pipeline step and clicking on the main, and now you see the same sender information, but the receiver information has now been updated and it now has the updated interface determination information. There's also one additional tag that says, hey, do I need to execute a mapping? The answer is yes, you need to execute a mapping. So then I can go to the request message mapping, SOAP header, main, and this is now going to tell you what the mapping. So you will not get the mapping information here, but this, if you want to look at what is the mapping information, what was the mapping that got executed, you will have to go to the trace statement. So go to request message mapping, SOAP header trace, double click it, and then you see detailed execution pipeline, right? This is extremely detailed, that will give you information on what happened when PI executed this step, and out here you would have a step that says, hey, this is my mapping. Right, you see here exactly. You just keep scrolling down and you will see mapping underscore XMLNS, or just search for the word mapping and you then will get the name of your interface mapping. You see this OM SRC to target, and then the mapping will start getting executed. And once your mapping is executed, come down, your remaining steps of your pipeline would get executed. Okay, so the idea behind SXMB Moni is that it is the heart of your, because it is the heart of your monitoring, because all your pipeline steps are going to get executed in SXMB underscore Moni. Okay, so now we've done one portion of the monitoring. We've looked at SXMB Moni. What other options do we have? Okay, so now that we've looked at SXMB underscore Moni, let's go back and look at what other monitoring options we have. So let me go back to my PI homepage. Okay, I'm going to close my browser again. Okay, close all tabs. All right, now let's launch our PI Java stack or the PI homepage. And how do we do that? I execute the transaction SXMB underscore IFR. Right, so now my transaction SXMB underscore IFR is launching. Oops, there seems to be a problem. Let's execute it one more time. Awesome. Okay, so something wrong. So I've executed SXMB underscore IFR, and now that I've executed SXMB underscore IFR, let's go to the configuration and monitoring home. Right, now within the configuration and monitoring home, you see multiple tabs that are here: common, integration engine, and adapter engine. We've already looked at the component monitor. Now let's look at message overview. Okay, so now I say let everything be default. I say click on display, and here we go. So in the message overview, as the name implies, you get an overview of all the messages that have processed in your system. So for the scenario that we have built, the file to file scenario, from the timeline, you have a timeline that is here for the past 24 hours. If you see in the past 24 hours, this PI server has had a total of 5 messages. 2 messages for this particular interface and 3 messages for this interface. So the idea of your messaging overview is to give you an overview of all the messages that are processed in your server. And here you can always select the various components of PI. Here you have integration engine, then you have the adapter engine. So let's click on the adapter engine and say display. Perfect. And now you see you have much more data coming up, because there are some interfaces that have executed directly in the adapter engine, right? So each component of PI will have different data to view. So if you want to get an overview of, hey, what happened in the past 24 hours in the adapter engine, you out here it shares AE caption, but in your PI servers it will show adapter engine. So select message from components adapter engine. AE stands for adapter engine, and you can see all your adapter engine information here. So again, BS file system 00, there were 2 messages that were inbound, and then again after the PI mapping got executed, there were 2 more messages that came out. So similarly, you can see there were multiple other interfaces that have this data. What if you want to say, hey, I want to see in the past 1 hour? Do not worry, you can also do that. So you can give hourly data, you can give daily, you can do weekly, you can do monthly, and you can do annually or yearly. So all of this information is available to you, where you can get an overview of what's going on in your system. You can export this data, you can get a detailed view of the system, you can export this data, save it into a spreadsheet, and so on. Okay, you will have to do a lot of individual figuring out of what this detailed views. Let's do a quick check. So the detailed view in this case is giving you, hey, what is the sender channel, what is the server node, what is the quality of service, and so on, right? So the idea of let's go back. So the idea of message monitoring, what did we do? We went into monitoring, common, and message overview. And this message overview will give you an overview of all the messages that have executed in your server. You can export this data, and you can archive it offline for doing any kind of reporting that you want. All right. So now let's go to the next line item, which is the integration engine. Right. What is the integration engine? It is the runtime of your PI. It enables you to monitor your messages. So let's click on message monitor database, right? I've gone to monitoring integration engine message monitor database. Okay. What has happened? Your SAP GUI has launched, and what transaction is this? Any idea what transaction this is? Let's execute it, right? I'm just saying menu, program, execute. Do you remember this transaction? Yes, this is nothing but sxmb underscore moni. So because sxmb underscore moni runs on the ABAP stack, even from the Java stack, if you would like, you can always launch sxmb underscore moni. So I'm going to close this. So what we did, we looked at monitoring, we looked at the common transaction, we looked at integration engine, message monitor. This will in turn lead you to sxmb underscore moni. There are multiple other monitors available. Cache monitor. What is cache monitor? Again, let's wait for this to load. Okay, cache monitor is nothing but all the objects that we had created gets persisted into the memory in PI, and that memory is called the runtime cache. So your cache status always has to be green, and this is in green. You can also launch the cache from your SAP PI directory. To check your cache status, go to sxi underscore cache, go to the transaction sxi underscore cache, hit enter, and you see it is the same transaction that you see here that is visible here. You can see all your individual objects. So if I want to check my communication channel, let's go to bs underscore file system underscore 00 bc underscore. It's pretty, there are quite a few objects here, so it will take you some time, not to worry. Here we go. So yeah, you just saw that. Yeah, I double click here and I can see, hey, under my BC file system 00, I have one communication object, and this has been persisted into the cache. Similarly, you can also check that in your from the Java stack using the integration engine monitoring. There are multiple other monitors. We will look at each of them as we build upon our scenarios. As we use those scenarios, we will look at each of them. Okay. Now let's go to the next tab called the adapter engine. All right. Now let's go to adapter engine and let's click on the message monitor. Okay. I'm on the adapter engine tab. See, it is in bold. Click on adapter engine and then go to the message monitor tab and execute the message monitor here. So let's go ahead. Do I want an overview? Yes. Perfect. So now I get an overview that in the past 1 hour from 10:30 to 11:30 as per the server time, my sending component BC file system 00 to SIOA SRC, there was one message. And then after the receiver was identified and the target message was created, there was one message. Similarly, there are other interfaces that got executed in the past 1 hour. You get information around that. Now go to the database tab, and now you can see in the past 1 hour there were 68 messages that got delivered. But I want to know what was my specific scenario, right? So if you remember, our scenario has 00 as my suffix. So I'm just hitting 00. And I can see the messages that are only relevant to me. So the idea is you can obviously search for your messages through multiple ways. You can select the period. You can say last hour, last 12 hour, this year, and so on, right? So let's click on the message. And then you see here, you have the message header information. You have the message content. And here, if I click on payload, let me allow pop-up, always allow. Okay, it's going to reload again. So let's go to database. Let's make the sender component a *00. Now let's click on the first line item and let's go to the message content and let's click on the payload. Same thing that we did in SXMB Moni, the same thing. And now I can see, hey, this is the output of my mapping. Awesome, excellent. But what about my input? Why is this the output? If you see here, you have a sender system and a receiver system, right? So this is after the receiver was identified and after the mapping got executed. But what if I want to see the input message? So this line item does not have any receiver information. So now I'm clicking on the main document and then I can see the input message. Okay, so the same idea of what you see in SXMB_Moni, but then you can also see that in the adapter engine. So PI provides you multiple views of the same thing, but you would need to, when there is a problem, you need to go into each of these transactions and try to find or locate the source of your error. Okay, with that, there's one last thing that I would like to show. I'm going to close the message monitor. In the adapter engine, the second item that is very important is this communication channel monitor, right? So let's go ahead and click on this communication channel monitor. So the communication channel monitor is used to monitor your communication channels. Remember, we created a file adapter, a sender file adapter, and a receiver file adapter. What happens to it, right? What was that file adapter doing? What is our sender file adapter doing? Our sender file adapter is looking at the file system, and is every 60 seconds, if you remember the configuration settings, every 60 seconds, let me launch the home page of PI. Let's launch the interface and scenario, because that way we could look at it, look at the configuration and open. And while it's loading, and also launch the ESR, open. Okay, while it's loading, the communication channel monitor enables us to look at the status of our communication channels. Again, I'm using a wildcard character and I'm saying go. Okay, so there are multiple communication channels that have 00 available in it. So I'm now going to just change it like this. I'm saying *00. Again, there are multiple people who are using *00. So let's do one thing. I'm now going to go ahead and do an advanced selection criteria. I'm going to click on this advanced. So now I have an advanced selection criteria. I want to check for a communication component. Okay, BC file system 00. Is that ours? Yes. So now I'm deleting this and I'm clicking on go. Perfect. And now you see this is the communication channel, and the last message that was processed was at 11:02 a.m. So let's now go ahead and put in one more. this is my sender communication channel. Now similar, before we go ahead more, let's look at this is our receiver communication channel. Now let's look at our sender communication channel. So I'm going to do BS star 00 because the name of our center communication component or business system was BS file system 00. So I've selected that and said go, and now my sender channel is visible. Now what do you see here? Scroll down, you can see here at 11:32:58 the polling started and it finished, and then 11:31:58, right? The polling interval is every 1 minute, so every 1 minute the PI system is looking for a file, and if it does not find a file, it obviously does not create a message, but if it finds a file, then it's going to create a message. So let's do one thing, let's go ahead and upload a file. Again, I'm going to CG3Z. Okay, I have my data available here. So this is my front end file system. Delete. This is my receiver information. Oops. I save, upload. My file has gotten uploaded. Now let's keep refreshing here. Go. What I want to show you here is, once the file has been processed, you should see a log here in the file adapter that says, hey, I found this file and now I've refreshed this file. So I'm going to refresh here. Okay, let's look at the directory. Here the file got picked up. /n A11. I go into my directory, my training directory, and I see the file to file input file is here. Let's wait because it runs every 1 minute. We'll just wait for that minute to happen. While that is happening, the idea of communication channel monitor is to monitor your communication channels. We will induce an error, do not worry. Now once we are done with this, the next step is going to be inducing an error and then seeing how to use the monitor to check for those errors. Okay, so I'm going to do, so one file has disappeared, the file has been picked up. Now I go to my communication channel monitor and I refresh here, and once I refresh, if I go down, you see here at 11:34 one file was found and that file was picked up and processed, and then I can click on the hyperlink and it will lead me to the message audit log. If I go to the message log, I can then look at the message log that tells me, hey, this was the directory that where I was looking for the file. I found the file and I started executing the various steps that were required to process this particular file. Okay, and then if you see at the last step, write to file, and this is the name of my output file. So if I go to my output directory, file to file, and if you see here output 20160816 0816 113458 113458 This is the file that got written. So basic idea being, in PI, in the message monitor, you can see multiple information in the logs. The idea for this session was to give you an overview of it. As we start building on various exercises, we will start using these extensively. Okay, now let's go ahead and make our scenario field. So what I'm going to go is, I'm going to go into file to file.xml. I'm making a copy of it and I'm calling it file to file err.xml. I'll open it with Notepad. And you know what, let's go ahead and remove the date of birth of the first employee. Okay, I've removed the date of birth of the first employee and I've saved the file. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and upload the file. Again, I'm going to CG okay, my file is called file to file err because it's going to be error. And but when I'm sorry, I keep making this mistake. I need to change the order. I shall do that soon. So I'll call it file to file err, whereas when I'm uploading it into AL11, I will still call it as file to file. Okay, the file, remember my decision, allow, and the file has been uploaded. Right now, let's go one layer above. The file to file is available. Let's keep waiting. Okay, another thing that you would want to do if you don't want to wait for 60 minutes, 60 seconds, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, select the communication channel and stop the channel. Right? Now that I've stopped the channel, I'm going to select the channel again and start the channel. The idea is rather than wait for 60 seconds, you can just kick it off immediately. And now let's see what has happened. At 11:38, my file got picked up, right? So if I refresh here, voila, the file is gone. Okay. Now if I go here, we should ideally have seen one file, but we don't. Why? Because remember, I had changed the data. I had made it in such a way that the data was going to error. So why did it error? Now how do I check? So what is the transaction that we do for monitoring in PI? We look at SXMB underscore Moni. So I'm going to /o SXMB underscore Moni, MONI Moni. I'm clicking on monitor for processed XML messages. Repeat, the transaction is SXMB underscore Moni. Double click on and click on monitor for processed XML messages. Let it be the last 1 hour. And if you see, the file has errored. Just a second, there's some problem. Okay, the transaction is still getting executed. Just give me a second while I check this up. Okay, so that is the expected behavior, that the message is now held up because of the fact that the data is in error. There was a missing data. So let's do one more thing now. Let's look at this exercise by just give me a second while I sort out my desktop. Yes, so now what I'm going to do is to make my scenario fail with a red flag. We're going to go into message mapping. Okay, now remember we have a date of birth field. Let's do some date transformation here. Okay, so this is my message mapping. Let the message mapping load. This is my date of birth. So what I'm going to do is, previously the date of birth was a straight field mapping. So now I'm going to do a date functions where I'm going to say, hey, okay, where I'm going to do a date transformation. My bad. So what does the date transformation mean, right? So if we look at the input data that is being triggered, the input data has. How do I go to the input data? I go to the inbound message, payload, and double click the main document. It has it in the format 1-jan-1990, right? So I'm going to say, hey, my input date format is in DD. So this is as per Java date format. So I'm going to say DD MMM- what is the input format again? Sorry, DD MMM- MON. Let's look at the Java date format. Sorry, I'm not too sure. So let's say Java util date in my Google, and once I do that, okay, so here we should be able to see the format. Give me okay, let's just say JAN. A month is represented as Jan, and then okay, give me a second. Sorry about that, I'm back. The idea for the input date format is that because we are in the input XML that we are providing the date in the format. Sorry, one second. Here we go. Just too many windows open. I'll have to cancel this. Sorry. Minimize this. Yeah. So the input date format is in the format DD-MMM-YYYY. So now I'm going into a date transformation function. And I'm saying, please transform the date from DD-MMM-YYYY to YYYYMMDD. And let's just go ahead and execute it here. execute my mapping program here, and when I execute my mapping program here, you see now the output date format has changed. So from being in the form 1st Jan 1990, it has now changed to 1990 1st Jan and so on, right? So let's save the mapping, and after I save the mapping, I'm going to right click on the mapping and activate the mapping. Okay, so I've activated the mapping, and now that I'm done with activating the mapping, let's go ahead and trigger the interface, right? But now instead of the file containing, let's go ahead into the input directory out here. Okay, notepad, let's go ahead, reintroduce the date of birth, right? And I'm going to say here, yes, I'm going to reintroduce the date of birth, make it 1st Jan 1990, save the file, and now I'm going to again execute the CG3EZ. My file has been uploaded, and now that my file is uploaded, to rather than wait for 1 minute, I'm going to go stop the channel, and I'm going to start my channel. And now if I go into sxmb_moni and I refresh, I should see this new message that has come. And if I double click the message, I go into, I want to see my input message. So input, payload, right click, display documents in payload 1, and then I go into request technical routing, payload, display document in window 2, and now you see the date format has changed, right? Now let's do one last change here. Let's do one last change in the file. Now I'm going to go ahead, open with notepad, and instead of giving it as, let's say like this, right? What happens? I'm now going to go back, upload the file. My file has uploaded. I'm going to communication channel monitor, stop my channel, start my channel, and I'm doing this because I don't want to wait for 60 seconds. My polling interval is 60 seconds. So I'm starting and stopping the channel so that the polling gets refreshed. And now I'm refreshing, and if you see, the message has errored, right? The message has errored, there's a red flag. And now when I double click this message, I can see the reason. It says there's something wrong with my date of birth field, right? If I want to see detailed error information, you see now there's a new tab called error. I double click on that, and I can see the same error information here, and it says when it is executing the mapping for the target field, employee info, date of birth, there's a problem. Now I'm double clicking on the trace statement here, and I will scroll all the way to the bottom, and I can get detailed information on what the problem is, right? Unparsable date. Unparsable date 1/01/1990, because PI expects it in the format DDMMMYYYY, but I have the date is invalid, and PI in the logs clearly tells me that it is invalid and the message is failing. Okay, so this is what PI does. This is the beauty of the monitoring in PI. Every message can be monitored. You can check what the error is, and you can restart a message, you can cancel a message. In this case, the data has a problem, and because the data has a problem, what am I going to do? I'm going to select this message, and I'm going to click on cancel. So what this means is I cannot restart this message from now on. Canceling a message means the status of my message is final. I will not do that, and I will leave it at that. What other error information can be provided, right? What do these icons mean? What are the various other icons? Like, what is this icon, right? If I see this icon, what does this icon mean? If you want to see that, there's a legend available here. 1 minute, documentation, legend, yes. So I click on this legend button, and here you can see all the various logs. The checkered flag is completed. This red flag is manual, restart possible. This flag is there's an error, but restart is not possible. And where's that flag that we wanted? This message is completed, ended manually, cancelled. All of this information is possible. You can look at the legend, as in when you start getting into more scenarios, you will start hitting various kinds of errors, and this legend will come to your help to understand what this icon really means. Okay, so let's go back to our slides. So we've looked at component monitoring, we looked at a message monitoring. There are three other monitorings, end-to-end monitoring. End-to-end monitoring is the ability to monitor your message end-to-end. So let's say you have a file that is picked up by PI and now it is being sent to an SAP system, and you want to know whether the message was successfully processed in your ECC environment, right? So end-to-end monitoring provides you with an ability where from PI, you can connect to your SAP end system, you can connect to your SAP backend systems and check the status of the message. This requires additional configurations, and this is an extremely advanced topic. This configuration of end-to-end monitoring is typically done by your system administrators. But at this point, suffice to say that end-to-end monitoring means you can from PI check the status of the message not only within the walls of PI but also outside of the walls of PI onto the target system. Performance monitoring is for you to be able to get some performance logs. Let's quickly look at that. If I go into adapter engine and I'm going to click on performance monitor, this needs some special configuration. I'm not too sure. Yes, so this is not the performance monitoring is not activated on this particular server. Again, this typically is done only on production servers, because only from production servers you need performance data. But suffice to say, again, this is a very advanced topic, but with performance monitoring you can monitor the performance of your PI server and performance of your message. Okay. Cache monitoring, we've already looked at that. Cache monitoring enables you to monitor the status of your cache, if your object in the cache is being reflected, if your object in the server is being reflected in the cache, and so on. Integration process monitoring, we will look at that when we do the CC/BPM exercises, but there's an additional monitoring screen available where you can monitor specific business process engine, BPE engine components, or in CC/BPM or integration process, and which we will look at in the last exercise. Okay, so with this we've come to the end of this module. What we looked at a very high level, what we looked at was component monitoring. Component monitoring enabled you to look, let's go back quickly. If I go to the component monitor, you access component monitor from here. Your component monitor gave you an overview of all the engines and the status of those engines. Message monitoring, we looked at message monitoring from SXMB_Moni. We saw how a message input payload can be looked at and an output payload can be looked at. You can always double click a message, click on inbound message, payloads, main documents, and you can view the input message, click on technical routing, payload, and output message, and you can look at the output message. So the idea is SXMB_Moni is one of the transactions, and then we did communication channel monitoring, where you could look at the status of your message in the communication channels. And how did we do that? We go into adapter engine, and within adapter engine you go into communication channel monitor. You can also use the adapter engine message monitor to monitor the message status. You can use the integration engine message monitor to monitor the status of your message. And performance monitoring enables you to monitor the performance of your message. End-to-end monitoring enables you to monitor the status of your message in your end system, whereas cache monitoring enables you to monitor if the status of your cache is in green. And how do you do that? You go into transaction SXI_cache. Repeat, SXI_cache, and here the cache content is up to date, and you can check for your objects individually here. Okay, so with that we've come to the end of our monitoring. We also looked at making your PI messages fail by inducing an error, and then once we induce the error, a mapping error, we could monitor the logs and so on. We will continue to use all of these transactions in each of our hands-on exercises. From the next scenario onward, from the next session onwards, everything's going to be just hands-on exercises. You will be using these extensively, and as we keep using them, you will get yourself even more familiarized with these and building on those. Okay, with that we come to the end of this topic, and we shall see you again in the next session. Thank you.